42 years ago, a young director created a sci-fi film with mostly unknown actors and a plot that very few had any faith in. But George Lucas's movie gained quite a bit of popularity and laid the groundwork for a very successful film series. The Star Wars franchise would go on to make Lucasfilm worth $3.6 billion, earning its money from films, TV shows, books, comics, clothing, video games, a $4 billion Disney deal, toys, conventions, toys, jewelry, and toys, making it one of the most successful film franchises ever. So what makes Star Wars so important? Sci-fi and fantasy movies are a dime a dozen, and most of them end up kinda forgotten. To leave such an impact on society, Star Wars must have something more than just big explosions and sick flips. Star Wars is something much more complex, with themes and metaphors that can be endlessly dissected. I could easily make 100 hours of content on Star Wars, but for this video, I want to discuss what I think are the 3 most important themes in the movies. These themes are common issues that we face today, which make it easy to draw parallels between Star Wars and our own lives. But seeing as the saga is broken up into 3 trilogies, it's also interesting to find how storylines tend to rhyme with each other between eras. The final movie in the Skywalker saga is coming out this year, and many longtime fans will be rewatching the movies in preparation. Or maybe the sequel films are what got you into Star Wars. Either way, I hope that the next time you watch these movies, you can look for these themes and find others that speak to you. That being said, let's begin. The Force is the lifeblood of Star Wars. It was perfectly explained by Obi-Wan in A New Hope as
an energy field created by all living things. It surrounds us and penetrates us. It binds the galaxy together.
Cue an appropriately flummoxed Luke, because the Force has always been mysterious and ethereal. On the surface, it appears to just be ESP powers granted to space warlocks. But take a deeper dive and it seems to have a divine intelligence behind it. It seeks balance and uses individuals to further that goal. There's also constant talk of
destiny. Destiny.
Destiny.
Destiny.
Destiny. Destiny. Destiny.
Almost all references to destiny are directed to members of the Skywalker family, as are most events in the Star Wars saga. But what makes this theme interesting is that it is rarely spoken by a character referencing their own destiny. Save one exception, it is always an external person talking about a main character's destiny. Fulfill your destiny. Your destiny lies with me. Because everybody is trying to manipulate the Skywalkers, even the good guys, and they do so by lying. The Force never presents itself as trumping free will. That one exception that I mentioned earlier was Han Solo claiming that the Force doesn't control his destiny. Characters are constantly faced with choice after choice after choice that fundamentally change the galaxy, but those decisions are never made for them. Yoda contradicts himself by telling Luke that if he so much as takes a glance at a dark path, then
forever will it dominate your destiny, consume you it will!
As does Obi-Wan by telling Luke that if he doesn't kill Vader, then the Emperor has already won. But Luke proves them all wrong. He does dabble in the dark side, he does spare his father, and the Empire is ultimately undone by those decisions. This manipulation is driven by one very human desire, the desire to control the future. This is done by pretending to know the future. But in most fantasy worlds that deal in magic and supernatural power, time, and more specifically the future, is one thing that can rarely be altered. We cannot control the future and everything that's going to happen to us, but we can control the decisions we make. I know it's off genre, but it reminds me of my favorite quote from The Lord of the Rings.
All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us.
The Skywalker family is synonymous with Star Wars, and even today we continue to talk about which characters could be a Skywalker or a Solo or a Kenobi. But themes of family go much deeper than who's related to who. In the original trilogy, we focus on Luke and his journey to discovering his family. We've already discussed how manipulative side characters can be when it comes to the Skywalkers, but what's interesting is that they use family ties to sway Luke's actions. His aunt and uncle prevent Luke from living out his dreams because of their fear of how similar he is to his father. Ben uses the heroic stories of Anakin to convince Luke to come with him to Alderaan and become a Jedi. And Yoda uses the excuse of Anakin's impulsiveness to flake out on training Luke. Luke hears so much about his father that it makes him create a false image in his head about who his father really was. By the end of The Empire Strikes Back, that image is shattered by Vader's revelation. Luke spends the rest of his time piecing together how he can reconcile his own identity that he had projected on his father. In the finale of the trilogy, Luke proclaims,
"I am a Jedi, like my father before me."
Effectively coming to terms with the fact that certain elements of his life he can identify in his father, while not placing his entire identity in the man that became Darth Vader. In the prequel trilogy, we center on Anakin himself. We get an obvious religious analogy with Shmi Skywalker's virgin birth of Anakin. But Anakin's lack of a father motivates him to search for father figures in his life, the primary ones being Obi-Wan and Palpatine. He does create his own family with Padme, but this is ultimately destroyed in his attempt to save it. Anakin believes that one of his father figures can help him save his wife, and he dives in headfirst without considering the larger implications. But Star Wars doesn't portray family as all bad. In fact, Luke's other familial plot twist is a much more positive experience. On a thematic scale, the reveal of Leia being his sister doesn't really change anything for Luke, and that's what makes it beautiful. Over the course of 3 films, spanning 4 in-universe years, Luke develops a very close relationship with Leia. Now, I'd like to make a side note here. Everyone likes to joke about the weird romantic tension between Luke and Leia. It's clear that Lucas didn't originally plan to make a family connection between the two characters. But even in Empire, Lucas began making a concerted effort to play down the romantic tension between the two characters by deleting certain scenes. In the newer canon material, Luke and Leia have a much more platonic relationship. But back to my point. Luke finds a closer and more realistic family in his friends. They support and love each other through some of the most difficult times in their lives. So when Luke learns the identity of his sister, it doesn't fundamentally change his relationship with Leia, proving to him that family is not dependent on blood relationships. Emotion wasn't a primary plot point until the arcs of the prequel trilogy made them relevant. Say what you want about the prequels, but they undoubtedly gave us new ways to view the original films and look for themes that we hadn't previously realized were there. One way it does this is by giving a more comprehensive look at what the Jedi were like during the days of the Republic. We falsely believed them to be ancient wizards with grand powers fighting wars across the galaxy. While they may have turned out that way, what we found in the beginning of the prequels were more like a group of monks, focused on keeping the galaxy as peaceful and quiet as possible. The Jedi are portrayed as emotionless, striving for logic and peace before any kind of passion that would drive them to irrationality. The Jedi are taught to avoid emotional attachments, give up anything they fear losing, and if someone you care about dies, you gotta push that crap way down and not think about it. Then you're expected to go fight in horrific wars and meditate your way through any PTSD you might have. Yeah, I can see how that's a healthy way to deal with trauma. But the entire Star Wars narrative rightly moves away from this idea into more of a belief in balance. For a more in-depth look at the idea of balance in Star Wars, I really recommend some of the comics and TV shows, but the movies explore the concept as well. Star Wars evolves to focus on a balance not only in the Force, but an internal balance. Yoda himself shows character development from his speech in Revenge of the Sith about not missing those who have moved on, to when he reunites with Luke in The Last Jedi.
Skywalker, missed you have I.
The emotion that gets the biggest narrative evolution is love. In the prequels, love is to be pushed away. Anakin's volatile love for his mother leads him to commit some small-scale genocide, his love for his wife leads him to commit some large-scale genocide, and his love for power leads him to going full Hitler on the galaxy. The original trilogy makes us face a hard question. Does someone that has committed these atrocities deserve love? Can someone that has gone full Hitler be redeemed? Do they deserve forgiveness? I'm not here to answer those questions. I'm just here to show you what Star Wars gives us. And Star Wars shows that forgiveness and love, when in check, can redeem the worst the galaxy has to offer. The sequel trilogy expands on this idea of emotion. I don't want to comment too much on the sequels because their story isn't yet complete, but they've undoubtedly showcased the emotional ranges of the primary protagonist and antagonist. Kylo suffers from outbursts of emotion. His emotional instability, represented in numerous pieces of broken and scarred imagery, is the source of his power and drives his pain, as per the dark side custom. But Rey is an interesting counter. She's not emotionless like the prequel Jedi, nor does she keep them in check in the way that Luke does. Instead, she gives into her emotions and uses them when she fights. I can't quite say what her story will hold, but it's interesting to consider that our hero gives into her anger in the way that we typically see villains do. These stories are not new. The original Star Wars is a retelling of the hero's journey. Parallels of history, mythology, and religion can all be found in these tales. That's what draws us in. But Star Wars puts a fresh coat of paint on these legends and gives us new ideas to think about. The parallels to our world are easy to spot, but the internal rhyming can be just as poignant. How does Kylo's journey relate to Vader's, and what does it add to the idea of redemption? How does Leia's story relate to Padme, and what do each of them say about women in roles of leadership? How does Rey's lack of lineage relate to Luke's abundance of lineage, and what do each of them say about destiny? Star Wars is deceptively deep. Everything from its visuals to its music to its acting all have a deeper message, and many of these messages hold a mirror up to the viewer. Star Wars is more than just a series of flashy sci-fi blockbusters. In many ways, it's a statement of who we are.